The Department of Education educates 0 students. It employs 0 teachers.
$268 billion. What does the Department of Education actually do?
We're trying to somehow make sense of it when it's very clear that the government has positioned itself against the citizens. And the government shouldn't tell me that I'm a domestic terrorist because I take an interest in my child's education.
Many would say that we are being so extreme by just shutting the entire Department of Education down. After all, Americans still need to be educated.
But they're not being educated.
1 in 3 8th graders are functionally illiterate. When people can't read, write, and do math, we're a remedial country. I think this is a generational opportunity for historic change, and without that, we could lose the country.
Sam and Angela, I am so glad that the conversations that we've been having, Education Geeks, are now happening across the board, across America, and finally, parents are waking up. They woke up during the lockdowns, but I think now there's another level of awareness that parents are seeing that our education systems are just failing children. And so here we are sitting at probably the beginning of some massive education change in America. And I could not be more excited to have a conversation with both of you. So for those who don't know a little bit about your backgrounds, Sam, maybe share a little bit about how you got into this world of parental rights and advocacy.
So I am a mom of 3 little kids, and the school was not serving my oldest when he did 1st and 2nd grade. And at the end of 2nd grade, I said to my husband, I think I could fail at homeschooling him and he'll still be better off. And that started me on a convoluted journey of discovery and realizing that schools don't educate, they school. It's an entirely different thing. And that we have been trained by our schools to trust them and to believe that they educate, even when the evidence is very clear that they don't. And so I became an advocate for homeschooling. And then I changed the word to home education because I want people to get away from the idea that school is education. And I've become a very outspoken critic of the schools and proponent of parental rights and parent involvement with their kids and preservation of the family and all of the good things that that implies.
You know, I would say when people ask me what are some of the major things that I've changed my mind on, homeschooling is exactly that. Because I used to think that the homeschool kids were strange. These are the kids that couldn't fit in, or maybe the parents are a little weird. But you're not weird.
Thank you. You don't know me that well then.
And you had, or maybe we're all, I mean, maybe we just need more weird like us. But truly, there is this stigma that has been attached to homeschool families. And I think that you're one of those pioneers that broke the stigma because you and your husband had a very successful, typical career in Hollywood. And you could have probably chosen any school you wanted, but you chose what you understood is the best.
Yeah, it's true. We considered private school. I actually enrolled my kids briefly in a very small private school after I'd homeschooled for 1.5 years because I felt so inadequate. That's what prompted me to write my first book, which is called They're Your Kids, an inspirational journey from a self-doubter to a homeschool advocate. And part of the reason that that we have this idea that homeschoolers are weird is because for so long, everybody went to school, and the only people who couldn't go to school were the weirdos because they just couldn't. And so their parents kind of were forced into this situation of, well, we've got to do something, but he's being so bullied, or he just doesn't get the material, or he's just too bright, or whatever. And so they were outliers. In Hollywood, of course, it's a little bit different because Hollywood kids are homeschooled a lot. When they go to set, they have tutors on the set. And so there's a different ethos there. And of course, we lived in Hollywood. And in our community, which was sort of on the outskirts, there's a very large contingent of home educators there. And so I found some people to work with who worked with me and who helped me on my journey. And it really was a journey of tremendous discovery that I wish for every parent.
So we've been having so many conversations about parental rights, and the recent conversation is about the possibility of the Department of Education being dismantled. And so having you here, Angela, to speak about the Department of Education is a great opportunity for us to hear from you when you were working for the Department of Education, what you saw there and what you experienced.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a real education on the Department of Education because I served as a press secretary for that department under the first Trump administration. And the things I saw there and the things I learned there about how education works are things that I can't unsee and think everyone should know. So now I work with the Defense of Freedom Institute as their spokesperson to help put more power back in the hands of parents and to help expose what kind of horrors the teacher unions have really inflicted on America's students. And we're at such an interesting moment now in education because we're at the dawn of the second Trump administration. And we have brand new data on just how terribly America's schools are performing. So I think this is a generational opportunity for historic change. And without that, we could lose the country because, people say defend public education, defend, defend, defend. You cannot defend these failing results. It doesn't have to be like this. So I'm really excited to be here and talk about what the path forward could look like, where the public schools aren't this perpetual disaster, that parents have options and they can pick really great ones for their kids.
So there are not a lot of people that I know are trying to work themselves out of a job, but it seems like people who are going now into the Department of Education are trying to do just that. And that really means something. So I looked at some of the numbers from the insane expenditure of the Department of Education last year was something to the sum of $268 billion spent through the Department of Education. And given that you were there a few years ago, what are examples of things that you have seen there that were leading to these insane sums of money?
Sure. Well, right off the bat, the department itself is not much more than a very expensive middleman that takes money designated by Congress, these are federal education dollars, and distributes them out to the states. We shouldn't need a 4,400 person department to do that. And in fact, we don't need one. I'm firmly on the side of shut it down, get rid of it. But there are some more specific abuses of federal dollars that I also think are important to mention. And so much of that has come in the form of DEI. Just in the first weeks of this second Trump administration, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, has canceled contracts, hundreds of billions of dollars, that were going to do things like equity assistance centers. We're going to drive equity in the schools. Teacher training. We're going to tell teachers that they're racist and this is CRT, and we're going to force it onto them. That doesn't help anyone learn how to read, write, or do math. And then it gets down to the just plain weird. There was a $1.5 million contract to monitor a mailroom. I worked there. I didn't know the place had a mailroom.
The Department of Education's mailroom needed $1.4 million in monitoring?
It said to observe a mailroom. This is how opaque it is. And how when things are done in a way that aren't transparent, there becomes these opportunities for tremendous amounts of waste, fraud, and abuse. So without this federal agency in the way, we could send more dollars to the states. We could put more power in the hands of parents. The department was created as a giveaway to the teacher unions when former President Carter was running for that office. It's been pretty much a giveaway to the teacher unions ever since. We're not getting the return on our investment. 1 in 3 8th graders are functionally illiterate. That means their freshman year of high school, a teacher puts a history textbook in their hands, and that accomplishes nothing because they can't read it. They can't extract meaning from words on a page. So somebody might hate me, hate this current administration, hate, whatever flavor of politics they don't want to have around. But I'm asking them to hate this failure more. No matter what you think of me, no matter what you think of our political side. The results are so bad, we should all be unified against this because we can't let it continue.
But they think you can fix it.
Well, that's my point. Sam, I want to ask you, don't you think it's a little extreme maybe to shut the entire Department of Education? If we're seeing that the results are bad, shouldn't we try to fix it or invest in it? Shutting it down would mean that the Title I kids don't receive funding, kids that can't afford to go to school. You have the special needs kids who would need funding from the federal government. The research that's coming out of them, maybe we need better research out of the Department of Education, they would say. Like many would say that we are being so extreme by just shutting the entire Department of Education down. After all, Americans still need to be educated.
But they're not being educated. So it's kind of a silly proposition. But let's get back to basics. It's not in the Constitution. The Department of Education is a made-up thing. It's not constitutionally mandated. Therefore, the government has no right having a Department of Education. Now, there are other ways to get money to people, but the Department of Education was enacted, as you said, under Carter, and our education standards and schools have gone downhill ever since. I don't know how, I brought up the idea that people think you can fix it. My contention is it's not broken, because schools have now been virtually co-opted by the left in order to indoctrinate children in non-academic things. If you want to go back to academics, I would support that, except you'd be on the path to the same outcome. So you want to reset the clock to what? 1980 when scores were still abysmal? 1990 when scores were going downhill? Like, where do you want to go? What we have to understand is that school is the grand experiment. We've only had schools for a little over a century. We're looking at a problem that the government created and said, hey, government, fix this. But the government created the problem. Maybe we need less government, not more. And that's my stance, is just less government, not more.
So what does less government mean? What do you shut down the Department of Education? What does it mean the morning after, 6 months later, a year later? Like, what do you think that looks like?
You know what? I'm not a bureaucrat. And so bureaucrats do what bureaucrats do. I've heard people talking about it saying it's not going to be an overnight thing. So there are programs who benefit people, but there's obviously a tremendous amount of grift. And so we've got some big problems to tackle. But I don't think that the way to tackle them is to enact more government. I think it's less. And I'm not really sure. I mean, the administration is doing this tremendous overhaul of everything, discovering all this fraud and waste, and they are shutting stuff down. And just shutting stuff down, people are getting laid off. Those people are out of jobs. But if their jobs were that important, they wouldn't have any trouble finding work in the private sector. Unfortunately, our school system has really generated a tremendous number of useless people, like people who have degrees that are absolutely useless, that are bona fide by our institutions. And so we need to take a long, hard look at all of this and ask ourselves, is this really what we signed up for? And it's not, of course. It's not. We were sort of ushered into it. We were grandfathered into it.
Angela, you mentioned the 4,400 employees for the Department of Education, plus there are all the career bureaucrats, the sum of 48,000, I think, in the states that support the whole gestalt of the Department of Education. When you are there, what do these people do? I mean, I just think of them as people who just sit there behind a desk if they show up to work and just write checks, give our money away, because they're not educators.
No, the Department of Education educates 0 students. It employs 0 teachers. So the idea that there are a bunch of people sitting at desks, or worse, not sitting at their desk, and just giving away our money, that's pretty close to correct. We don't need all of these layers of administrative bureaucracy getting in the way. And that's true even at the district level. This is bigger than just a federal problem. If you look at the change in student enrollment numbers versus employment in the public schools over time, you see tremendous growth in administrators. If you want to be an administrator, it is, a booming industry, right? Well, student enrollment has gone down. So the unions perpetuate these myths of shortages over and over again. No, hiring's better than ever. Meanwhile, so many parents who have the option to get their kids out of public schools bail out right away. So I think a huge problem is the growth of non-teaching positions. There's also the issue of the pay band structure, where if you ask any school principal, they can tell you who their rock star teachers are. They can also tell you who their terrible performers are. But they don't have the flexibility in many places because of these union contracts to really reward those great teachers. Sometimes it's very hard to recruit special needs teachers because that requires specialized training, which requires, a larger investment up front. Well, everybody wants those students to have teachers, so why not allow districts the freedom to pay those teachers more? Well, the unions stand in the way of that. I mean, I also want to address the issue of funding for Title I schools that you mentioned at the federal department. If the department closes down tomorrow, that money doesn't go away. It just gets distributed straight to the states. I'm on the side of block granting even the competitive grant dollars straight to the states. Get the middleman out of the way. Let's restore more decision-making power to the states. Take it out of DC. Funding for special needs students, that should go through HHS. Put that in Health and Human Services. The Department of Education has an Office for Civil Rights that does really important work in, just like the name says, protecting civil rights in education. Well, the Department of Justice also has a civil rights office. So I think we ought to just transfer that responsibility there. So the law still gets upheld, the money still gets sent out. We just cut out a very expensive and inefficient middleman along the way.
What's so interesting to hear is the amount of redundancy that there is with these positions and the web of convolution that is created with these programs, because you'll have this program that is initiated by the HHS. There's this show called Amaze, which actually brainwashes kids to think that they're born in the wrong body. And that program, which is, again, about transgenderism, the new religion in our country right now, sadly, that was funded by the HHS. It received hundreds and thousands of dollars. But then you have also the Department of Education that is involved in programs and grants that train teachers and ask teachers to implement this really amazingly horrible product into the classrooms. And this web of convolution that is created through multiple departments creates a situation where we, the public, cannot hold anybody accountable because they're each pointing at each other and it's one big Jenga. So actually, let me show you this product, Amaze, because I don't know how many people have seen this, but this is in classrooms across America. And you want to track down who started this. And so many parents are asking, well, where did this come from? And everybody's looking at each other and they're saying, wait, I think it's the Department of Education. I think it's the teachers' unions. I think it's HHS. I think it's everybody. And it's just this massive web that you just can't untangle. Watch this.
Everyone has a way of showing their masculinity and femininity to the world. That is your gender expression. Everyone has the right to be respected, no matter how they look, act, or dress. The way a person shows their gender doesn't tell us anything about who they're attracted to or which gender they feel they are inside.
All right, so you get the point here. And the issue with something like this is we talk about parental rights. You have parents who are screaming about this. They're going to school boards and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of it. And so you go to Department of Education. The Department of Education sends you to HHS. The HHS sends you to the Department of Agriculture, and everything is so convoluted. And I think this is also why the monstrosity of the funding expenditure is so bloated, because everybody is dipping in to make money off this.
So the complexity and the convolution you talk about, that's not a bug in the system. That's a feature. They want that. That's why I'm so excited about the work that DOGE is doing to just pull back the curtain and make sure people can see what we have been forced to fund with our tax dollars.
Right.
Yeah, I remember the story that we were complaining about the food in schools, for example. I don't call them public schools. I call them government schools because they truly are government schools. Government schools will say that pizza is considered a vegetable because there's some tomato on this. Well, who do you go and complain to? So you would think you would go to the Department of Education because the public thinks that the department does something, that the public thinks that the Department of Education does something other than write checks from our own pockets, where then we find out, no, actually, the pizza that's considered a vegetable in school, that was actually approved by the Department of Agriculture and not even the Department of Education. So what does the Department of Education actually do? Nothing.
Well, it sends out a lot of money. It runs some competitive grant competitions that make up a very small minority of its budget, but quite a lot of man hours. It also administers federal student aid. It's the nation's largest consumer lender, and it does a terrible job. when FSA was first created, it was actually supposed to make money for the government. You think people pay back their loans, pay interest on the loans. Like any other bank, it ought to make money, right? And yet it's been so horribly mismanaged that it's now a gigantic money sink. So that's why I think part of dismantling the Department of Education should be turning federal student aid into its own independent agency so that it can't be someone's piggy bank. Heaven forbid we get somebody in office who decides that it's time to foist even more student debt onto taxpayers. It should function like a bank and not somebody's piggy bank. And I think making it independent would go a long way toward accomplishing that goal.
Sure. I have to say, interesting with the video that they said everybody deserves respect. Why? Their worldview is that we are all a collection of accidents of nature. And so why does everybody deserve respect when they're teaching survival of the fittest in schools? So even their messaging is convoluted and really full of contradictions, right? But that's child abuse, to put that video in front of a child. It's child abuse. And the parents go to the government and say, hey, government, fix this for me. And my message to parents is government's not there to fix it for you. Government is actually there against your wishes. In a sense, like your desires are counter to the government's desires. And that's what we have to come to grips with. So the government should not be involved in the education of children. And to the extent that it is, it should be put on a very short leash. So as much as we can do to turn school boards back over to parents so that parents serve on the school boards, so that schools really are community centers and not just centers for government indoctrination that happen to be located in communities, we should be working toward that end. And all of this grift and all of these things that you're talking about are just more fodder for this argument. It's insanity that we're trying to somehow make sense of it when it's very clear that the government has positioned itself against the citizens. And we had the perfect example of that when Merrick Garland turned the FBI against parents and called them domestic terrorists. Do we need to get individual telegrams? Like what more do you need from your government than for you to be branded, parents to be branded domestic terrorists?
Yeah, I think what parents want is to be able to drop off their kids somewhere at a place that they can trust where they would learn how to read, write, and do math and then come home.
Right.
Is that even something doable? I get you started,
That's like
Sam.
saying communism would be great if we could just get rid of selfishness.
Yeah.
But we can't. And the government clearly doesn't have any desire to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that was the big switcheroo. So back in the 60s, the schools, the teachers' unions in the schools said, hey, education is not indoctrination. Get your Bible out of the classroom. We don't need the Bible in the classroom because we're not talking doctrine. Well, fast forward to today when this is all they're talking and all the academics have flown out the window. And in fact, if you're up on, like if you follow the test scores and everything, it's not just that half of 8th graders can't read. It's what are they qualifying as able to read?
Right.
Because the books that they're saying, oh, this means that they can read are 4th grade level books, not 8th grade level books, or certainly not the 8th grade level books of 100 years ago. And in the state of Ohio, for instance, a test score of proficient is now 38%.
Yes, education is the only business in the world where you can actually lower the standards at the end of the cycle and then say that you met your goals.
We're going to lower the standards because those are the goals that we met. And the problem with the teachers' unions, and this is really the crux of the matter, am I right? It's the teachers' unions. So we've got teachers who have been accused of sexual misconduct in the classroom. Boy, do we have teachers accused of that now. And the thing is, they can't be fired. So they go into a rubber room. So they sit in a rubber room. They take a second job. They still get paid as a teacher. They take a job as a real estate agent or whatever, and they do that on their off hours. And during the time that they're in school, they do their paperwork. And meanwhile, we're footing the bill for this. So there is something really wrong in the system of schooling that completely underserves the people footing the bill. And it's because of the lack of transparency. That bug, that feature, not a bug, is because they need to keep the money flowing to line their pockets, sadly. And I don't fault any of the teachers for that. I mean, the bad teachers, of course, I fault. The good teachers, because there are good teachers out there. I don't fault them for this. But they're stuck in a very corrupt system right now.
what is the relationship between the Department of Education and the teachers union? So when I was following you guys at the Department of Education during the lockdowns, I remember the first message was get the kids back in school.
Yes.
And for several months, you were advocating to go back into the schools, and you're out there in the schools saying, "I'm here. I'm not getting. I'm fine. Let's get the kids back." And Betsy DeVos was saying the same thing. Let's get the kids back into the schools. But then the kids were not going back to schools. So do the teachers' unions have more power than the Department of Education?
They do, and in many major cities, they held education hostage.
Yeah.
Chicago
Absolutely.
was a prime example of this. The Chicago Teacher Union actually tweeted out that the push to reopen schools was rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny.
Yep.
I'm sorry, these union bosses talk about institutional racism. Well, look at the kids they were locking out of school. They were predominantly minority students. So if they want to talk about institutional racism, they were the institutions doing the racism. It was horrific. They tried to demand, the Defense of Freedom Institute has issued a whole report on this, how in different cities, the local teacher union bosses would demand things like Medicare for all,
Right.
or, higher raises and cash payments and get rid of teacher evaluations.
Right.
So if someone's terrible at their job,
They
no one
tied
will
so
notice.
much in.
And they said, without those things, we won't reopen. Then former President Biden
Which had
took
nothing to
office.
do with why they were closed. Had nothing
That's
to do
right.
with
Had nothing to do with COVID. None of the things
they
you
called
mentioned.
it safe reopening. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Like, does COVID
Safe
look at you differently depending on this?
Yes,
No.
I would feel much safer with a raise. I would just feel much safer
Apparently
if
so.
my job were safe and you
if
couldn't
you-
fire me
Yep.
or
And
whatever.
if you had no goals.
Right. And if you just change the goals so that, as long as I show up.
And could the Department of Education not step in and say no?
We could not force them to reopen. If we could have waved a magic wand, we would have.
And I will say at the time, there were other entities in the U.S. government, Dr. Birx, for one, who was issuing directives on government letterhead to governors, telling them not to reopen, not to reopen the schools, not to go back to business as usual. And so there were conflicting messages which justified the teachers' unions in their position, and the teachers and the schools and the superintendents and all of that. But I will say, during the lockdowns, early on, I was sent a video from a very lovely public school where a friend of mine's son went to school, elementary school. And they went through, the principal made this video and got all the teachers to do personalized videos for the kids. Just, hey, I'm here and I know we're locked down, but I want you to stay safe. And I'm just out walking my dog. And then I'm going to go home and make sure you wash your hands. Not a single teacher out of the 30 teachers, because I sat through that whole video, said anything about education. Said anything about make sure you study your spelling words.
Make sure you read every night.
Do the reading that we're going to talk about Huck Finn when we get back, or we're going to talk about, right? Nothing.
Right.
That's how interested these people are in seeing that your child is educated instead of schooled.
Well, so I went through education school. And I call it a left-wing seminary because I recognize that I was taught how to be part of the system and how to be compliant, right? What is an expert? An expert is really somebody who is basically regurgitating what you were taught in these seminaries.
Yeah, because otherwise they're a conspiracy theorist.
Otherwise, you're out of line. If you haven't memorized the lines and you haven't followed those lines and you don't continue to do so once you graduated, then you're no longer part of that matrix, and then you get kicked out and you're ostracized and you're a xenophobic, homophobic, six herb, whatever it is that they threw, white Christian nationalist extremists, right? All the things that they'll throw at us. And so I don't entirely fault the teachers because I was also one of them. And this really brings me back to the next point, and that is the head of the snake. When people ask me what do I think are the major issues in America's education system? Well, yes, we have the teachers' unions, and I think people have known this for a long time, how much power they have. They don't really care about the kids. They don't even care about teachers either. They really just care about their political power. Then we think, well, maybe the problem is the Department of Education. Well, the problem with the Department of Education is that they basically don't help us. They just waste our money, but they don't actually help us. And then there's the third problem, which are the teacher seminaries, the head of the snake, because they have both the Department of Education and the teachers' unions pressuring them to indoctrinate teachers to teach Marxist education and then go back into the classrooms and teach our kids how to be activists. And so when parents send their kids to a school and they're told by the school that the expert, the supposed expert, this Marxist expert knows better than them what is best for their child, it should not come as a huge surprise to us why we're in this situation where we have isms taught in our schools. Marxism, transgenderism, environmentalism. When I was a teacher, it was all about environmentalism. And if you dare to bring up the Bible, if you dare to bring up the fact that America's DNA is built on the Bible, then you're attacked because it's going against the religion that is taught at teacher seminaries.
That's right.
And so how do we resolve that given the monstrosity of that problem?
So can I
Sure.
just for a sec? So we have a big problem because all the teachers are coming out of those places. So if you think that you're sending your child to a cute little Catholic school, find out where they're getting their teachers.
Yes, the teachers are fungible and the credentialing systems
But
are.
also, it's in the textbooks. So it's not just the teachers' colleges. There's another head on the snake, on the hydra, right? It's the textbooks, and the schools, regardless of their sort of worldview, often will just go and get whatever the next textbook is, and they don't review it. They don't look at it. So there's a group in Florida that reviews textbooks for the schools and sort of marks the ones that have like the Marxist whatever or the climate whatever in it. This was like 3 years ago, they sent back to the producer of the textbook. They said, hey, we can't have this stuff in the textbook, and allowed the producer of the textbook to revamp the textbook. And I was saying, no, you one shot and you're out. If you don't do it right the first time, why would we trust them to do it again? So, we have to be more discerning, and parents need to understand they need to interview the teachers of their children before they send their children into that environment. Specifically the teachers, not the principal. The principal could have the best, the principal could be the greatest person, but at the end of the day, his or her job is to hire a teacher and just get a teacher into that seat. And, you would hope that they would hold out for the perfect teacher, but they probably won't. So
there's an issue with the teacher shortage right now, which is why they want to open the credentialing system, which I think we should just let go of credentialing system altogether.
I'm fine with it.
Like, who says that these Marxist indoctrination centers are the ones who should actually...
Well, look, during COVID, I was on the side of the teachers' unions. Keep the kids out of school. It's better for them. Right. So this makes weird, strange bedfellows.
Right. If you go to college, it's better if you're inebriated for 4 years. At least you just pick up the nonsense.
Where are our colleges today? The president of Harvard was released because she plagiarized. Where are the colleges today, and why are we still putting our faith in college? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that you can't get something good out of college, but it's not a given. It's not a blank check, which so many parents write. They just write a blank check.
Well, I would say, back to Angela and what she saw at the Department of Education, not only are the parents writing blank checks, but that's their money, they can do whatever they want. But what we are expected as a society is to write a blank check through the Department of Education for the loan forgiveness program for many degrees that bring no value to our society, for jobs that don't exist and probably will never exist.
Right.
That's right. And what we've asked the American taxpayer to do is insane. If you came to anyone on earth and said, would you invest in this? They would laugh you out of the room.
That's a good point.
It's ridiculous. But when you talk about the head of the snake and, what can we knock down? What's public enemy number one in education? Yeah. I think it's DEI, most specifically equity. Look, if your doctor lies to you about your test results, that's malpractice. If a company lies to you about their product, that is fraud. If a teacher lies to you about your child's ability to read, that is equity. Because it's this happy sounding word.
Wow.
Right? Of, it's going to be equitable. Who would be against that?
They
knew what they were doing.
Angela, explain what do you mean by that?
So what equity has resulted in is just lowering the academic bar. A couple generations ago, we were teaching Latin and Greek in public high schools. Now we're teaching remedial English in college. And I think a lot of times as education geeks, as you call us, we can fall into this trap of, what happens when these kids turn into adults? We're living with it.
Yeah.
There are scores now of Americans ages 16 to 65. 1 in 4 are at the lowest level of literacy and numeracy. This is someone who cannot make change from a cash register. This is someone who cannot understand an employment agreement. This is somebody
they
who
can
can't
actually read, they can blend the words, but they don't comprehend what they're reading.
They have trouble extracting meaning from words on a page. That's a national scandal. And it makes you wonder what these schools are doing from kindergarten through senior year, but we don't have to wonder, right?
No,
you know what's going
Oregon, this is going back 5 years, they passed a law that you don't need to read or do math to graduate high school. And this year, New Jersey just enacted they're not going to accredit teachers. Like, they don't care if you're proficient in anything, you can still become a teacher. So why do we still believe that the schools have our backs or have our best interests at heart? But I love the idea that Angela has brought forward that they can shut down the Department of Education. They could shut it down. Apparently, I don't know all the intricacies, but it seems like they could shut it down overnight, shuttle some of the programs, just figure out which programs they can't completely shut down, shuttle that money until they audit and figure out how much money it really should be or whatever.
Right. And not have two heads that oversee the money so that you can actually blame somebody and hold them accountable.
Yes,
so
right.
The Treasury can manage the checks that are written to the states, the things that are related to HHS can move to HHS. And so rather than having this pass-through of Department of Education hovering over everything.
Well, we did it for a long time
continuity.
without a Department of Education,
Yeah.
didn't
We did.
we? We did it for a long time. And I'm not saying it worked, but it didn't work as badly as it works now. So it worked better. So
it's better for sure. Right now, we're a remedial country. When people can't read, write, and do math, there are more people going to college than who can actually do college level work. So what do the colleges do? They dumb it down.
Right.
The class valedictorian in a high school in Detroit attended University of Michigan as the class valedictorian, and she had to enroll in remedial math and get a tutor. And she was the valedictorian of her high school class. So when we're seeing those things, we need to take note.
Yeah, when you look up the literacy and numeracy rates in America, they will say things like, yeah, we're number 40 in the world, but we're so great on character development and social emotional learning.
Transgender. I think we lead the world in transgenders, right? And DEI.
And environmentalism, maybe.
Maybe not. We drew out of the Paris Accords.
So you brought up the teacher college credentialing program and the fact that many of the teachers are graduating with degrees in education, but they themselves can barely read. And I looked it up. Most recently, you need less than 14 hours of instructions on how to teach math in order to graduate from a teacher college with a credential in teaching math.
That's just scary.
And so what do these credentials even mean at all? Do they even matter? And should our society and schools say, you know what, I don't really care if you have a degree in education anymore. If you can pass our community test of what our community is expecting you to do in order to teach, is that the solution? Is it to just bring it back to the local communities? I mean, how do we become pragmatic about this? Because we do want to have standards. We do want to have equipped people in front of our students if they have to go to a school. Of course, Sam, ideally, it's the parents. That is ideal, but we also know that there is going to be no ideal anytime soon in America. So in the meantime, what would be a pragmatic approach to dealing with the teachers' unions, the head of the snake being the teacher seminaries, as I call them, the Department of Education? It's just a monstrosity to reckon with.
I think there are 3 pillars here to fixing this. The first and the most obvious is school choice. When schools have to compete for students they can't tolerate, I would say mediocrity, but they're actually worse than mediocre in a lot of cases, make them compete. Let parents make the call. The second issue here is character education. When we said we're going to bring schools back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, well, whether we like it or not, a child's character is developing from age 5 to age 18. So we can either have that character develop really well and have some guardrails and rules and things that are respected, or we can give up on that, and then you've got Lord of the Flies. I ask any teacher, and I know you've been a teacher, but I talk to friends who are in the classroom now, and so many teachers are leaving not because of compensation or not because of even wokeness. They're leaving because they don't feel safe. And then the third issue here is parental awareness. We can talk all day long about how scores are terrible, and all of it is true. but parents don't see it. 90% of parents say their child's doing great at school.
Mm.
Don't trust the report card your kid brings home. You just can't. Sit with that child and read. Ask to see their math homework. There is no substitute for that level of awareness. But it's a multi-fronted war that we're fighting here.
How does a parent know whether their child is getting what they're supposed to get from school? I mean, I get this question all the time from parents all over America. They write saying, I have this weird hunch that my child is in second grade. They can barely get through a chapter book. Is this normal? And on the one hand, you'll say, well, children have different levels of reading, and some kids start
different
later.
Speeds of development.
And by the way, it means nothing. Like it's okay. I mean, sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's truly not okay because they're, as you explained, they're being gaslit by the school. And so, what tools can we give parents to be more aware of what to expect from their kids' schools?
So the answer to, is it normal that my child can't read, is yes. The answer to, is that okay, is absolutely not. I think reading with your child is a big deal. But problem solving, even from those really young ages, is huge. You talk about these high school seniors who have got that shiny new diploma, they've been unleashed out into the world, but they have no ability to make their way in it. Well, most of them have a $1,000 computer in their pocket, that's their phone, that they can use to access the sum of all human knowledge. And exaggerating, but not by much, right? What they don't have is the problem-solving ability to use it to teach themselves. So if we want something called autodidactism, which is you seek out the information, you teach your kid to solve problems. And that can start
right away with homeschooling.
Oh, gosh.
Well, somebody really wise told me not a long time ago that children actually do come with a manual. You know how they say babies don't come with a manual?
Yes.
So Sam believes that children do come with a manual. So I'll let you tell us what that is.
And I love the fact that you touched on character development.
Thank
The
you.
only way to teach character is Bible. So, and I'm all for advocating that the Bible re-enter the classroom. And I'm not advocating necessarily that it enter as a religious text.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the best history textbook that we have. The best sourced history textbook that exists, especially for the time period that it covers. And we need to have the conversation about school choice because those words cover a myriad of ideas,
Yes.
right? So the idea that the parent should be able to choose the school that their child goes to, absolutely they should be able to choose the school that their child attends. But at the same point, I'm going to argue that parents should be involved in the schools. And that's the
Sure.
only way for them to really ascertain, is my child okay? Is he really learning the things that I think that he's learning? Or is he going in fits and starts and maybe he's not being served in the classroom that he's in? So once we get parents more involved, not less involved, and of course then the problem is they grew up with this idea that the government's going to take care of their kids.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a conservative ideal. And we should try to be dissuading people from that ideal because it's counterintuitive. You don't want the government taking care of your kids. That's a bad idea. And so we need to work against that. Maybe the answer would be have every local school have a local school board that is comprised entirely of parents. Maybe you have one person that's a business person from the community or something like that, but basically run by the parents. Then you can address, do we invite the union into our school? Or maybe this school, we're going to say no unions. That's probably the only way you can beat the unions, is for the parents to make the decisions. Because right now, people who run for school board are trained to operate on the school board. Guess who trains them? The unions, right? There is another entity that also trains that has arisen as a counter to people just rubber stamping union demands or superintendent demands. And he, let's face it, works for the union. So, but there has to be a way. There have to be cracks. We have to find the cracks, and the cracks have to, I believe, will be the parents getting involved. And I'm hoping that we're going to see a surge in that idea that, wait, I'm my kids' parents, and the government shouldn't tell me that I'm a domestic terrorist because I take an interest in my child's education. In fact, that's going to make me drill down even harder. I'm going to be super interested in my child's education and my neighbor's child's education also, right? And I think that's the way to get this done.
You brought up the Bible, which also brings up the subject of character development and indoctrination. And whenever PragerU brings up the fact that we need the Bible back in school because the Bible teaches human nature, it teaches discernment. If you work with your child and you work with them on reading the Bible, you can actually pick up their abilities and helps you as a parent discern. But whenever we bring up this fact that the Bible belongs back in school, the attack on us is PragerU is looking to indoctrinate. It's looking to religiously indoctrinate young Americans with these archaic ideas from the Bible. And the point I like to make is you cannot teach literacy without teaching character development. This concept that conservatives had over the past few years where you can teach reading, writing, and arithmetic and not teach character development and avoid, well, you're teaching 5th and 6th grade. What book are you assigning to the child to read?
Right.
There is character development in every piece of literacy that we assign. Are you assigning woke Melissa from Scholastic? Are you assigning C.S. Lewis? Right? If you're not assigning the Bible, which is the DNA of the American dream, then what are you assigning? Malcolm Gladwell? Is that the DNA of the American dream?
But the point is that the schools are indoctrination now.
Correct.
And it's very clear from the video that you just showed, that it's indoctrination and not academics. So all you're saying is, well, we want to counter-indoctrinate.
Well, I mean, what is it to teach a doctrine? To teach a doctrine, to inculcate, to educate. If you send a child to school, you would like to see results. I mean, everything you've been talking about is the lack of results.
Right.
But the reason we are not seeing the results we're hoping to see is because we're not willing to stand up for truth, or at least we haven't been until now.
Let me just take a step back, because we ought to define our terms, right? What is indoctrination? Mm-hmm. What is doctrine? Doctrine is your set of beliefs, the way you view the world, worldview, your belief set. And indoctrination is passing your belief set, the way you see the world, to your children. It is putting your doctrine into the children. Well, right now it's their doctrine that's going into the children. And it's a disastrous doctrine. It's a damaging doctrine. They're training children to think that by cutting off body parts, they can change how they feel inside. Mm-hmm. That's child abuse. And so we just need to be clear on our terms. Yes, it's indoctrination. That's what education is.
And if you choose to send your child to a school that is teaching a doctrine that you don't like, you got to yank your child out of there. And then you need to find a school that will teach the doctrine that you will support, and then stand up for that doctrine, for that which you believe, for those values. And as you said, with school choice, then parents can vote with their pocket.
Yes.
Right? They can take their vouchers, or they can take their funding, or they can take their time, as you would suggest, and they can really truly invest in their children and teaching them what ought to be taught. If you don't teach your child what ought to be taught, and you don't make sure that they're being taught what is right, somebody else will. Right. And that is, at the end of the day, what I think has been one of the biggest problems in America's education right now, is that American parents have been told that they need to step back and let the experts decide what's
important and what's right.
And under the guise that they were just doing reading, writing, and arithmetic, which they never had been. They never just did reading, writing, and arithmetic, because it's impossible. You can't teach reading, writing, and arithmetic without teaching
some doctrine.
Yes.
But also, when you talk about parents should take the money from the government, that's not a conservative value. And that's a struggle, right? Because the moment that the government money enters whatever system you've chosen to put it in, that system is corrupted by government money. And so we will no longer have religious schools, because the government money funding the schools through school choice will eventually insist that the schools teach something that the schools won't want to teach.
Right. They'll be able to hover over them and pull the strings.
That's the struggle, right? That's the struggle. So we ushered in government funding into colleges. And where are we today with our colleges? They're a disaster. Mm-hmm. They're a disaster. The college tuition rates have risen like 7 times the rate of inflation because government funding. In the state of Arizona, they instituted ESAs, their own school voucher, school choice program. And in a very short time, tuition rates for private schools jumped at like minimum 25 to 40%, just because there's more money, because government money. And why shouldn't they? That's free market. right? So they jump their rates. The Catholic school, the just the regular private school, all their tuition rates. Now, Arizona pictured that this program would cost them roughly $60 million. It's $900 million. Oopsie. I don't see school choice as being an answer. I see it as more of a problem, like more of the same problem, like let's fund more government intrusion into our education system or our school system. But I have yet to have somebody prove to me that it will be the answer. In the state of Florida, it costs roughly $16,000 to educate a student. So every family that signs up for the ESA gets $8,000. Where does the other $8,000 go? I don't know. Somewhere
at the Department of Education?
Somewhere. And then now, the first year in Florida, it was no strings attached. All you have to do is like show a little bit that it's basically educational. If it's the kid down the street that's teaching your daughter to play piano, that's cool. We'll fund it. The second year they said, oh, but we do want to see test scores. We do want to see the test scores. Pretty soon the tests will be online. You won't be able to see the tests, but the child will take the test. And pretty soon those tests will ask, what's your gender? And does your family have a gun? And where do they store the gun? Right? It's just rife with all kinds of issues. So leaning into school choice with due respect is a dangerous play. It's good in the sense that it gets kids maybe out of public schools, but it's bad in the sense that it makes every school a public school.
Angela.
Well, I hope to alleviate some of your concerns here because in states that do have robust school choice programs, we don't see private schools and micro schools and homeschools becoming public schools. The proof is in the pudding, and these places still have the freedom to teach the way that their students learn best. So I hope that can remove some of that concern. It doesn't turn them into public schools. They're not bound by the same rules that public schools have. And in states that administer their programs really well, which pretty much everywhere that's tried this has done a great job, parental demand is through the roof. There has yet to be a single school choice program that lands with a thud. They're all inundated with demand.
Oh, I don't doubt that parents love the idea of getting money from the government. I just doubt that it's a conservative value. Take care of me more.
Well, that money is their tax money. It's their dollars.
So it shouldn't go through the government.
That would be ideal, but we live in a country where you pay taxes, and some of those taxes are used for education. And I think giving parents the freedom to use the education dollars set aside for their children, that money is set aside to educate that child.
Right.
School choice means the money doesn't flow to a building that child may never set foot in. If their parents exercise their options to choose private school, homeschool, micro school, any other kind of school besides the one to which their child was assigned by the government. So school choice means more freedom and more parental empowerment, not less. I mean, think about homeschoolers, right? Right now, if you homeschool your child, the education tax dollars that you paid to the government to educate your child.
I know, and I paid them every year.
There you go.
And I never saw a dime.
Well, you should have seen a dime.
I was fine with that because the program that I pursued with my children, that program would never get government accreditation. Well, and so the moment that they put in, well, your school has to have some kind of accreditation. You can't just pick some random bozo who you pay $8,000 to educate your child. She'll be out of business.
Well, accreditation is its own problem, and it's a huge problem, not just at K-12, also in higher ed.
But without accreditation, that's taxation without representation.
That's what we have
socialism.
Now. That's what we have now is taxation without representation.
Well, in theory, the representation is that the schools are run by the government. That's the theory of the representation.
Okay.
When we just send money to parents, here's a check, do whatever you want. No, the ESAs are intended for education. Well, how do they tell the government, yes, this is educational?
Oh, different states have different setups, but the money is accounted for. It's accounted for much more through school choice than it is through just going to a government school. Government school, black hole of money. School choice programs tend to have some accounting functions where you're actually responsible for where those dollars
Exactly.
go.
And that will put the lone individuals or programs that will not go for government accreditation, they will be out of business.
Well, government accreditation is a little bit of a misnomer depending on where you are in the country. Accreditation is a huge problem, and we talk about it a lot in higher ed, where accreditors are supposed to guarantee some measure of educational quality. They're supposed to protect taxpayer dollars. In the higher ed level, they've done a really awful job of both of those things. So that's why reform is so necessary. And I think we found a point of agreement here that yes, accreditation reform is necessary at a lot of different levels. But the solution isn't just back down from the fight because accreditation is a mess. The solution is to fight that fight all the way so that parents can use their child's education tax dollars to actually educate their child. It has overwhelming support. And while this is considered a political issue, I consider it more of a politicized issue because an overwhelming majority of parents on both sides of the political aisle support school choice.
Oh, well, if it's popular, we should do it.
It works. It works everywhere it has been tried.
It doesn't. Not in Arizona. In
187 studies.
In Arizona, tuition rates went through the roof, and all of a sudden, the parents who thought they could take their $7,200 and go into that little school, they can't because the tuition now is $14,000.
Okay, well, what is Arizona pay? Per pupil expenditure at a standard public school is around $20,000 per year.
Yeah, but they're not getting
school
20.
Choice, that's why we need more school choice, not less, because if parents had all of those dollars, they could afford those private schools they want to go to.
I don't see them getting all those dollars. I haven't seen a program that provides them all those dollars.
True universal education freedom means that every single one of your child's education tax dollars is the parents to direct how they choose.
Well, it can't
so the solution is
you're
more school choice, not less.
But it can't be because you're still arguing for accreditation, which requires a government entity to offer the accreditation, right?
When accreditation is done independently with some oversight, it doesn't drive dogma. We're not seeing this now because the system is so messed up.
But it will drain funds. So not all the funds follow the child because some of the funds will be siphoned off for that program.
Just like there are funds, quote unquote, siphoned off for the roof of the school building or for the teacher to be there, for the lights to come on. There are other expenses.
This is true, but I'm not arguing that those things don't have funds siphoned off. You said the funds should follow the child.
That's right.
They won't entirely follow the child.
Well, I think that when an education program wants to seek accreditation, that's an expense borne by that program. Parents aren't going to be paying.
Is there a program currently where all the funds follow the child?
There are 13 states with universal school choice. That means everyone has access. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single dollar follows the child, because look what we've got at the federal level. There is no real federal school choice
aren't following
program.
the children.
And they should. They could do that if we dismantle the Department of Ed, kick it all to the states, and let them open up school choice.
So the money would go through the Fed and back to the states?
As long as we're being taxed for education at the federal level, those dollars, whether we like it or not, are going there. I would love
taxation
to not be
will be great. Everybody homeschooling their kids would be amazing. Having perfect human nature without corruption would be ideal. But as we can go back to the good book, we'll be reminded every time that even King David was flawed. I think that this is a very good example to the fact that exemplifies the fact that conservatives don't always agree on everything. And I think that when it comes to the world of education, because it is so convoluted, because there are so many layers of how to reach ideal, it's very challenging, right? Between the head of the snake, again, these are the teacher colleges and the credentialing system. And by the way, the credentialing mafia behind the credentialing system. If you want to start a teacher college, it is virtually impossible to open one, given that so many bureaucrats have had skin in the game to just rob Americans of what we deserve. It is very difficult to find utopia, but the conclusion, in my opinion, is that the teachers' unions have been the biggest bullies in schools. The Department of Education has just been wasting our money. More parent involvement is always a better thing. Getting parents to have a window into the classroom, getting them on school boards, sending them to smaller community schools where they have a bigger say, and really realizing that reading, writing, and arithmetic is not doable. There is always character development in every single thing kids do. And so we need to have a very watchful eye for where our children are going. This was a very pleasant, I would say, heated debate, and I'm not sure that we can really conclude what needs to be done right now. We
can't just fix it right now?
We can't fix it right now, but you know what? There is a quick fix. The quick fix is open your eyes and get involved, right? So I think there are many people who are listening right now and are, we've taken them to the macro level of the Department of Education and the funding. And these are things that most of us don't feel like we can really solve, but we have kids in school right now. And so given that we have kids in school right now or at home right now, there is much that can be done simply in your home. The most power you have, the most amount of power you have is in your home. And so if you're sending them to a government school because you have to, or it's the choice you've made, or you send them to a private school because you have to and it's the choice you made, you can still inculcate at home the values and the ideas and the character that you hope to see in your child, because that is, at the end of the day, what matters the most. It's not even about necessarily the test scores. I know of a kid who was at 4 years old, could barely speak. When he was in school, he could barely write. Then he got absolutely bored and started reading and writing backwards. And he graduated 82 in his class of 110. Sam knows that was Dennis Prager.
Exactly.
He ended up becoming an intellectual giant, not because of the academics that was behind him, but because of the character and the involvement that his family had in his upbringing. And all of that was despite the government schools that were hovering over his education. And so that can still be done. You can still inoculate your child against all of the garbage that's happening in our classrooms. And sadly, there's going to continue to be some government waste for a very long time. At least that's my estimation. But at least we're living through an era with eyes wide open and the tenacity to try to fight against it. And so that's my my hopeful, somewhat optimistic view of where our education is going in America right now.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more there. And I think you raised something so important, Marissa, which is no matter where you send your child to school, or if you send your child to a school at all, you still have to be educating at home. Your parents are your first and best teachers. I know that mine were. And my hope and the reason
they do very well.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know they will too. But I think we're at a really optimistic moment for American education. And I'm so glad I got to share it with you both.
Thank
thumbs
you so
up
much.
or thumbs down on dismantling the Department of Education?
Wait.
Great having you on.
Thanks so much.
Thanks again.
Thank you.